I guess you've noticed something a little strange with Dad. It's okay, though. I'm still Dad. This is a No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 6 of season 6, and we are continuing our series about encounters with aliens, this time with a discussion of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We've talked previously in some of our episodes in this series about encounters with aliens, such films as Fire in the Sky and the book War of the Worlds. And we're now going to be focusing on the 1977 movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was written and directed by Steven Spielberg. Main star is Richard Dreyfuss, and it also features Francois Truffaut, Terry Garr, Melinda Dillon, and Bob Balaban, and several others, mostly actors that I'm not super familiar with. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, I mean, the title is probably a very good summation of the film. It's a series of encounters with aliens, and it mainly focuses on Richard Dreyfuss's character, but there are also a lot of other people in the government, as well as some scientists, that there are these kind of multiple encounters that are happening, and they all seem to be driving towards some major contact with an alien species. And Richard Dreyfuss, the Roy Neary character in particular, becomes obsessed with these notes of music, as well as sculpting and drawing a mountain that I guess we'll talk about in more detail as we get into it. So that's just kind of just the brief overview for those of you who may not have seen the movie, but it's definitely a classic in the sci-fi genre. It's got some pretty famous scenes and some pretty famous depictions of things, and special effects are also, and we can talk about this more in detail, but I thought held up pretty well for a movie that came out in 1977. So as we've done kind of with all of the others so far, probably best to just kind of give our, original impressions, kind of what we had going into rewatching this movie for recording the podcast. And so I'll start. I know I had seen this movie when I was probably, I don't know, middle school age or so, but I didn't really remember it. And I watched it again, and it really feels more like for the first time in college, because I only remembered vague scenes before. And I really liked the movie. It's definitely the pacing of it is something that I can't put my finger on a better way to describe it than to say that it's the pacing of a 70s movie. I mean, there is some action, and there is some the plot moves, but also at the same time, it doesn't move with the same intensity that I think we've come to expect with movies starting in the 90s and on through to today. I mean, it's not the action-packed War of the Worlds starring Tom Cruise. It's not anything like that, but so the pacing definitely feels kind of more of its time, at least in my opinion. And I guess I didn't really like that when I saw it the first time when I was young, but when I saw it in college, I really did like it. And it was a really just an interesting movie that I really enjoyed. And haven't really seen it since then that I can recall. It's probably been, I'm not going to give a actual date to it because that is depressing to me, but probably on the order of around 2 decades or so since I've seen this movie. But yeah, I remember liking it. And Richard Dreyfuss, I liked his character. We were discussing a little bit before we started recording that there are a few things that like now just don't seem like choices that we would make, but I think we can also get to that a bit later. So Mel, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and just kind of give your first thoughts and impressions before we dive into the movie.
Sure. Yeah, this is a movie. I feel like I'm kind of like you, Matt, that I may have watched it when I was young, but it just didn't really stick with me. I also feel like I may have just watched parts of it on TV over the years. So my experience with the movie where I remember it and I remember kind of a very solid reaction to it was when I watched it several years ago. And then I wanted to watch it when it was in movie theaters in the last couple of years. But I want to say it was in movie theaters during the beginning of the pandemic times. And so, I mean, I haven't been in a movie theater in forever. So I didn't get that experience, which I imagine is pretty amazing to see it on the big screen. But yeah, I feel like, I'm the type of person who finds it really hard to say this is my favorite book or this is my favorite movie or something like that, because that changes all the time. And I have many things I enjoy. But I feel like this movie, through the few times I've seen it as an adult, like 3 or 4 times, it has become a movie that I just really enjoy watching. And I think I could probably say it's one of my favorite sci-fi films in particular. I think you're right that it has kind of 70s pacing. There is a bit of like, I can't even describe it, but as a person who grew up watching Spielberg's work, I feel like there's a certain Steven Spielberg-esseness to it with the kind of sweeping John Williams music and that sort of thing. But I also think it's like, I was thinking this while you were talking, it's a very thoughtful movie. There just isn't really like action sequences. You think like this is what like Star Wars would have come out and played opposite this at the time. And while that movie may also have kind of older pacing, it still had like laser battles and stuff. I feel like this film, Close Encounters, is just much more, I guess, thoughtful. I don't want to say the movies that we watched so far have been thoughtful, but I would put Close Encounters closer to something like Arrival than say maybe Under the Skin, which I think is thoughtful in its own way, or Fire in the Sky, because in Close Encounters, there's like the weird and the uncanny to the aliens. There's like fear there, but at the same time, it's not necessarily like attack or War of the Worlds or something like that. It's more about like, how would our government be affected by first contact, or how would a person on the personal level be affected by this, the unknown coming to pass, and what would that mean to come into contact with someone. So yeah, I feel like it's more like Arrival or the movie Contact in that regard, that it's not kind of like action packed per se, but more about like experience. And one of the things I noticed this time, like we're going to talk about, I'm sure, but I love the special effects. I think do hold up. The iconic moment of the huge mothership over Devil's Tower is amazing still. And the other thing, though, I was thinking was that this is a movie that's really interesting because, like, I feel like it's good and whole as it is, but you could have a whole movie about the government's reaction and trying to figure out how to communicate with the aliens. And you could have a whole movie about the Richard Dreyfuss character, Roy Neary, and I'm blanking on the woman's name, the mother of the child who's abducted. So the movie takes what could be 2 separate topics, the personal reaction to aliens and the government's reaction to aliens, and actually puts them together. And I know when they come in contact with the government toward the end of the movie, I'm like, oh, this could really feel like a different movie, but somehow they make it work. And so I'm not feeling like I'm being shifted too hard into something else. It's like when you try to talk about the movie, it's like all these disparate things that don't seem like they should be connected. But when you sit down and watch it, it really works. And that's one of the things I think that sticks with me. Yes, the musical idea of communication is cool, and the shots of the mothership are cool, but the idea of taking just all this stuff and throwing it in a bag and shaking it up and making a cohesive movie out of it just kind of blows my mind. And I know it was a long haul with other writers and Steven Spielberg kind of throwing their hat in the ring. And it went from, if we found a Mental Floss article that talks about things to know about Close Encounters. And the initial idea for it was like a government conspiracy, much darker feel. So I find it interesting that it ended up kind of where it is and that it works. I don't know, Matt, you may have a different impression of the movie than that, but I think that the kind of jamming those 2 ideas up together really works in a way that it might not have in a different person's hands.
No, I think you're I completely agree with you. And actually, while you were talking, just before you made the comparison to Arrival, I was thinking that of all the ones that we've covered in this series, that's probably the closest to it. But I definitely agree too that that movie Contact is probably a good comparison to it too, in terms of like tone and feel. Like that there are stakes and there is conflict per se, but it's really not action driven conflict so much as it is kind of trying to figure out the nature of what's going on and everything. But yeah, it's yeah. So I don't really know what else to say except that I totally agree with you that in all of that.
Yeah, the more I even think about it, I'm really seeing a lot more parallels to Contact, which is a movie that I haven't seen in, I don't even know. I mean, I really loved Contact when I saw it, but it's probably been like maybe the early, what was it? That was a 90s movie, right? Or an early 2000s movie. So yeah,
Late
it's been a
90s.
while. Yeah, late 90s. So it's
Mhm.
been a while. I read the book too, but I saw the movie and enjoyed both. But yeah, I think they do kind of have more in common than one would think. I was wondering while I was watching the movie this time around, on the one hand, there's so much of that awe that we talked about with aliens, like just because like aliens are out there, this is amazing, and there's almost like this joy that the character of Roy, the Richard Dreyfuss character, has in particular, but even the scientist that is played by Truffaut, I think his name is Lacombe, and they're just joyful to make this connection with these aliens, and I feel that too. There's like this awe there, but at the same time, when I sit down and think about it, or there are moments in the movie that seem kind of frightening to me and relate maybe to some of the scary aspects of alien stuff that we've talked about that doesn't shine so much in this movie. So for example, Roy is joyful that the aliens are there, but he and these other people the aliens did something to them to make them feel drawn to them and want to come. They're kind of grooming them in a way, which could be seen as this is how we make contact with people and it's innocuous, but it could be weird. And then you also have the idea that we know that the aliens have been abducting people, which explains alien abductions, and they do return the people. I don't know. There's just these moments in the movie where it's like when they show the mothership and they have all the ships around, the people are starting to freak out. Like there's these moments when it could go scary. But at the end of the movie, I feel so much hope. And like I was wondering what you thought about that, Matt. Like how they am I reading too much into it because I just want things like I'm like, this has to be dark. There has to be something dark here. This is the year 2020. 2022 when you're listening to this, it has to be that way. Or do you think there are peaks of maybe this isn't as like joyful and amazing?
No, I think there are definitely some moments where it's, I mean, I don't even want to say it's intentionally dark per se, but there are those darker moments. Especially, I think the alien abduction thing, I did find that unsettling. Like at the end of the movie, and I know we're jumping straight to the end here, but once contact is made, a lot of people leave the alien ship, and the first people that are released are like some people that were Air Force pilots. Well, I guess the Air Force didn't exist, but they were Navy pilots in World War II who had been abducted. And it's remarked that they haven't aged, and there's even a quip about Einstein being right about relativity and time dilation, that sort of thing. But I mean, I did find it unsettling that these people had been abducted and they just missed. I mean, if this film is set in the same year it was filmed, then that's 25 years that they've lost. If they were married or engaged when they were abducted, their partners would be twice the age that they are now. Their partners would be almost 50 and they'd be in their 20s, like. And then also the boy that midway through the movie is abducted, like his mom, and yes, we're both drawing blanks on her character's name, so I believe it's Jillian. I just looked at Jillian is the mom's name, but she and the boy are both kind of drawn to it, but then he gets abducted in what's a pretty frightening scene when you see the aliens showing up, and he opens the door, and there's the glowing light outside, and then he's whisked away. Like, she's terrified, and rightly so, because her child is gone. And I mean, it's hard to read that as purely innocuous. Yes, she gets him back what's assumed to be a few days later, but I mean, that experience for her had to have been a pretty rough one, having her young child. I mean, he couldn't have been more than what, like 4 or 5 years old. So
Yeah, he was walking, but not steadily.
yeah, like, so probably younger than that, even, 3 or 4 maybe. Like, it's so no, I don't think you're wrong to say that there are some darker aspects here. And I mean, it's even kind of how the film opens up, where we're introduced to Lacombe, the French character, they've just discovered these airplanes from World War II that have just mysteriously appeared. And so that's kind of the very beginning of the movie, even, which sets off a nice parallel to the end, where you actually get the pilots back. But I mean, throughout the movie, when I would think about that did kind of, I mean, it bugged me a little bit that, these aliens are peaceful aliens. They certainly weren't intending to cause harm by any means. I mean, it was meant to be a peaceful first contact type situation, but the ramifications of these abductions for these long periods of time are something that, I mean, I think those unintended consequences are still pretty major. And I can't imagine disappearing in 1945 and reappearing in the world in 1977, and just the amount of change that's happened in those years even has had to have been amazing and hard to adapt to for these people.
Yeah, and I was struck anew when I rewatched this a couple of days ago as to how the government just kind of accepts it. They have the list of people who've been abducted, and they're checking them off to make sure they're all there and safe. And I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting that there are these undercurrents of miscommunication and misinterpretation, but nobody's like jumping for weapons. It's a really interesting kind of portrayal to me. And the other thing that kind of creeped me out, I totally get what you're saying. It's like this is the beginning of the 4400 1977 version. But when these guys are getting off the ship, and this is before, I mean, we have men, women, little children from different eras, dogs, cats, like all the abductees are coming off the ship. They're kind of like in a weird trance type thing. Like, they don't say a whole lot other than like their name and what ship or what plane, what squadron they were in. There's one point where someone actually just takes a person's hand with one, like picks the person's arm up with one hand and then shakes it, because the guy just acts like he's so zoned out he can't really shake hands. And it's like this moment where you're like, oh yay, these people are getting to come home. But yeah, I mean, they're like 22, and a quarter of a century has passed by, and I don't know, there's still like, there is an ominousness to it. And yeah, the scene where the kid Barry gets taken, both scenes with that are really interesting, because you have straight up, almost like out of horror, like an isolated farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, kind of in Indiana, and this woman is just completely alone and isolated with this kid. And it takes like kind of Midwestern, I guess, like nostalgia or whatever, the kid being safe, and totally turns on his head with the kind of outside. I mean, even the kid ends up in the middle of the road and almost gets hit by a truck at some point, like the danger. But yeah, when it's almost like a home invasion when they come back for the kid, because she's like pushing stuff against the door, trying to lock the windows, and they're coming in, they're doing something to the air ducts in the house. And like you said, the weird lights. And yeah, if you're watching that for the first time, that's really creepy, because the government's trying to communicate with them, and maybe they're trying to communicate with us, but we've seen them make people obsessed with them, and then all of a sudden they're like coming for this kid. And it's great that he got to come back. I'm glad that he didn't lose all those years and end up still like a child in the 90s or something.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would have been probably too dark for Steven Spielberg or anyone hopefully really to have him just show back up, and his mom is elderly and he's still like 4 years old. That would be just raw. But also too, just in terms of the ominousness of the tone of the movie, because there really is kind of this ominousness, because the people on the street, as it were, the Roy Neary, who's Richard Dreyfuss's character, and Jillian, the boy's mom, like, they don't know what's happening to them really, and they feel compelled to like play these musical notes. I know the kid Barry is playing it on like a little toy xylophone, and there's the really famous scene of Richard Dreyfuss at the dinner table sculpting Devil's Rock out of mashed potatoes while his family is kind of like horrified looking at him like, what is wrong? And that's, even the source of the quote that we used to open this episode was from that scene. And I mean, Richard Dreyfuss's obsession with the vision, I don't know if it's a vision or what, but whatever's been implanted in him by the aliens to draw him to that place, like his obsession basically pushes his family away in a scene that I guess we can talk about in a minute. But I mean, yeah, I mean, just it's unsettling to watch him, because like there is this kind of like, we know that the aliens are there because we have seen flashes of them, we've seen like lights on their ship and that sort of thing, but even still, like watching it, knowing that the aliens are not just in his mind, like watching that scene where he's sculpting Devil's Rock out of mashed potatoes is like, you kind of are like, is this guy okay? Like, or did something break in him,
Yeah, his what his family sees as a breakdown is really kind of scary. I mean, you have that moment where he goes outside, it's like yelling at the sky, like why, kind of, I can't remember exactly what he's saying. I think he's like asking why or what the answer is. And I mean, it's almost like he's like, why did you do this to me? And he goes from at the beginning of the movie seeming to have a pretty good home life. I mean, he has the train and the kids are watching television with him. He is listening to the When You Wish Upon a Star song, which gets incorporated into the movie theme toward the end of the film. I guess implying that he maybe wanted something more, or was like open to dreamy kind of, like he would have been fascinated by this opportunity. But I mean, it kind of like pushes him over the edge because he can't find any of the answers. He's constantly, like you said, sculpting this monument and trying to draw it. The mother is trying to draw it as well. When Barry's playing the music on the xylophone, he ends up, what is it, like taking stuff from neighbors' houses and the garbage and bricks and mud and throwing them into the house. That's when his wife leaves him with the kids.
Yeah, that's the scene I was talking about.
Yeah, it's just like, you can totally understand why she would do that. I mean, you can understand why people would be scared of him, because he just can't even, he and Barry's mom like seem to form this bond. We talked before the podcast began that we're not sure why they get so close. We weren't sure that was earned, but they definitely feel like they're the only people who understand each other. And yeah, I agree with you that that's pretty scary, especially the dinner table scene that we referenced in the intro, where he starts to realize that his kids are kind of like scared of him. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe the aliens didn't realize what they did. Aliens are aliens, so maybe they just thought this was another cool way to communicate, not realizing they were going to destroy these people's lives. I don't know, but it's kind of scary.
Well, and like I said, I don't think that there's any sort of maliciousness on the aliens' parts. I don't think that they were, like you said, deliberately trying to ruin these people's lives or anything. I think it is kind of an unintended consequence of their contact with us. But it definitely does give an edge to this, to where there is, I mean, it's not all wholesome and cheery and yay, first contact and everything's going to be great. We'll share our knowledge and get knowledge from another civilization. I mean, there are people's lives that are greatly affected by this. And I mean, I would even say too that scene where his wife takes the kids, where I mean he really is like, looks like he is losing it, because he's taking dirt and throwing it through the window, and then grabbing chicken wire out of the yard, and throwing other stuff in that he's eventually going to use to make this gigantic sculpture in his living room. But I mean, it's hard not to fault his wife for taking the kids and leaving, because I mean he really did seem like he had lost it. And I mean, arguably he had, because he didn't know why he was so compelled to sculpt this thing that, I mean, he didn't even at the time know where it was. It wasn't until he finished sculpting the one in the living room that he saw the news broadcast and pieces it together. So I mean, I can imagine being in his point of view, I can't get this image out of my head, and I keep trying to make it real by drawing, by sculpting, by trying to get it out and trying to figure out what the heck this mountain is and why I keep seeing it. I mean, it's hard not to think that he would be feeling that he was kind of, questioning his own sanity too,
Oh yeah. I mean, I think in some ways he almost maybe understands like why his wife left with the kids, because there's that phone call where it sounds like their marriage might be completely over, and he's like, well, at least, basically I think he's kind of saying like, at least let me come and talk to you in person, try to explain this, or at least let me see the kids. And yeah, I mean, I think he sees the disintegration of his life. But then at the end, I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about this now, but at the end he kind of gladly goes along with them. So he completely changes by the end. One thing I do think we need to talk about that, but one thing, when you were talking about the aliens like not meaning this collateral damage, I also thought it was interesting seeing the government's reaction, because in a way, while all three parties, the aliens, the government, and the people that are being affected all want the same thing, they also all work at cross purposes for various reasons. I thought it was interesting that the government decided they didn't want to tell the public that there were aliens because they were afraid it would cause a panic. So instead, they say that, what was it, like there's some sort of, I guess it was anthrax or some sort of thing hurting the animals, right?
Yeah, I think it was anthrax, and then they said that there was nerve gas or something that was accidentally released at the
it's some train wreck or something.
Yeah.
Which causes a panic. So I'm like, I totally understand why you want to get the people evacuated so that there is no panic because of aliens, or just in case the aliens do something, like you don't want people there. But at the same time, like what they do actually inadvertently starts a kind of a panic in the background. I thought that was interesting, that there's all these people and groups of people who are trying to do what they think is like the right thing to do, and then there's all these unintended consequences.
Well, and I do feel if there were to be if you had to cast a villain in the movie, I guess it would be the government, sort of. Not that they were villainous or deliberately being antagonists, but I mean, they're trying to keep things secret. Did sort of, well, like you said, it did cause a panic, even though they were trying to avoid a panic, because go figure, chemical spills and deadly viruses are also panic inducing, shockingly. But also, once Richard Dreyfuss and Jillian, and I don't remember the third guy's name, once they kind of escape from the group that are being of other people that have also been drawn to this place, other civilians been drawn to this place, they escape and are trying to and actually go to the mountain, because they're caught close by but not actually there. I mean, the government is flying helicopters all over them, and then starts dropping knockout gas onto them. I mean, they're not shooting at them, but I mean, they're certainly, so I mean, it's not lethal, but I mean, they are definitely have this kind of antagonist role of trying to prevent them from fully answering the question of why they're seeing this mountain in their heads.
Yeah, I noticed that too. They're not shooting at them or anything, but every time one of these people that the aliens have put an image or sound in their head shows up, the government takes them and interrogates them. And, the Lacombe, the French scientist guy who's like trying to communicate, he keeps saying, like, we need to try to work with these people because what if the aliens gave them some sort of information or trying to communicate with them? And then you have, of course, the general or whatever is associated with the government who's like, no, we can't do this, they're just going to get in the way or they're going to get hurt or something. And yeah, I think you're right, they were like mildly villainous. they're an obstacle that those people have to get past, which is interesting.
Well, and this would be the same government that covered up Roswell when that happened. So, of course, they're being looked at as slightly the antagonist. But yeah, I mean, I think really you've got, like you said earlier, the three groups. You've got the government, the scientists, and just the civilians. And I really feel like the scientists, specifically Lacombe, and the civilians are kind of more in line with each other than the government is. And I thought it was one of the lines that really stuck out at me was something that Lacombe said to the what was it? He wasn't a general, I guess he was like the marshal or whoever he was, that the head military presence. He's trying to convince these people to, like you said, study and work with the civilians. And he says, look, they were invited here. And I thought that was a really good way of describing it, because yeah, the aliens did pick them maybe randomly, but they were essentially chosen because that's why they were seeing these visions and hearing this song in their head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like maybe we need to talk about the end now, because I keep thinking about the end the more we talk.
I say that's probably a good plan.
Because, at the end, the government had this plan, which is cool. I mean, basically the idea is, I figure maybe I'm wrong, but I figure if aliens show up, probably the war aspect might happen. Some of the kind of military aspects of what we talked about with alien invasion ideas might happen. But these parties in this movie, there is some hope that they try to work out their miscommunication. So the aliens give up the abductees, which is kind of scary, but at least they're letting them go. And then the government has put together a group of people who have volunteered to go with the aliens if the aliens will let them. And I guess they'd be like ambassadors, or maybe like, I don't know, like an exchange of some sort, like, to you guys learned about us, now we want to learn about you. I'm not sure. I don't recall if they really explain it, but they're all ready to go and they all have these red jumpsuits and everything. And Lacombe wants to add Neary to it because he's just so into this, and he made it, of course, to the Air Force Base. And so he gets a jumpsuit and the aliens choose him. And I thought that was a neat way to go back to what you were saying, Matt, about how Lacombe says, well, maybe the aliens chose these people to be the people they would talk to. And it's kind of telling that when they line up all these people in front of them who are like, we are ready to go into the wild blue yonder with these aliens and learn things, the aliens take the person that they had been communicating with and they had implanted the images in their mind. So maybe there was that plan the whole time.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it, that they specifically chose him because, I mean, he had already kind of been chosen, and maybe they could feel the imprint from what he'd been seeing, or maybe they had already chosen him before and he was the only one that had been chosen who was there. So I don't know. The aliens are still kind of this like unknown entity. Like they never actually speak. We do see them, but the only communication that we really see is via music, and it's their mothership communicating with the government back in I think they described it as establishing a tonal vocabulary, which I thought was a really cool idea. But we as viewers still have no real idea about them. So, I mean, they really are just kind of this blank slate of what their intentions truly are. And we don't know what's going to happen to Neary. And like you said, we don't know what's happened to the people that were previously abducted. And none of that gets answered. So if you're looking for satisfying answers on that going into this movie, you're not going to get it. But that's not to say that it's not a good, not worth the ride there. But yeah, like I don't know where I kind of lost my train of thought there, but yeah, the aliens themselves are just sort of a blank slate, and it's hard to know what their full intentions are, I guess, is what I'll leave there.
I mean, they show that they have a lot of technological power. If there ever was a conflict, there is slightly like maybe a show of force, I guess you would say. But then they also seem to be very as open and forthcoming as they can be, since we can't really communicate with them. Because I'm assuming it's going to take, because they say something about feeding the tones into the computer to try to translate it. So it's probably going to take a while before we can communicate with them. I don't know. I mean, maybe the point of the movie is that it's ambiguous and there isn't an answer because we just don't know yet. It's first contact. So, you know, I guess the point of the end is that there is no end, that both sides are taking kind of leaps of faith to a certain extent to try to get to know each other. And you would need a sequel, I guess, to see if that results in interstellar war or not. Basically, though, like I said to you when we were chatting before we started recording, I find it ominous when the aliens are teaching us the tonal vocabulary and they end by playing the theme from Jaws. That was a little ominous.
Right. Although I will say I didn't find that as, you know, a threat more than just a nod and a wink to the movie. But yeah, it could definitely come across as, I guess, ominous, since I mean it's Jaws.
Maybe they watched the movie and they wanted to to gesture to it.
Well, and I think too we should mention that unearned thing that you kind of alluded to earlier that we talked about before we started recording. That is, if anything felt truly flat for me, that was one thing, and it really just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And it's so Richard Dreyfuss and the Jillian character, the third guy who had kind of been going up the mountain with them had fallen behind a little bit and then got hit by the sleeping gas, and so it was just the two of them, and they're overlooking the base that's been set up by the government, established for the contact. And basically, like, she says that, you know, she's not going to go down there, and Richard Dreyfuss says that, like, he has to go down there, he has to know. And before he does, they share a kiss, and it just felt weird to me. Like, weird enough that it really stood out, because prior to this, I mean, he had been married, and it, like you said, it at least at the beginning of the movie, it was a happy marriage. It does seem like it's either on the rocks or over now after everything that he's been through. But there's been no romantic inclinations between the two of them at all. Like, if anything, they were just two people who have this kind of shared experience. I mean, and she's looking for her son, and he's trying to find answers, and so is she. But there's nothing romantic about it, and it was definitely meant to be kind of a romantic kiss, and it just felt weird to me. And I don't know why it was included, because this is not a movie that's had any sort of a love story up to this point, and it just felt sort of shoehorned in there. So I mean, am I overreacting to this, Mel? I know you kind of agreed with me, but am I making too big a deal out of it? Should I just let it go, or was it just out of place to you too?
It seemed out of place to me too. It almost, even though I know it's coming now that I've seen the movie multiple times, it still kind of makes me cringe a little bit, because we don't know how his marriage and family was left. And they put so much effort into showing how it was affecting, especially his kids. And it's really, I don't know, it's kind of strange to me that he can step away from them and become so closely connected to her, and then he just leaves them. Like, he accepts the alien, he wants to go, and then the aliens choose him and he just goes. And yeah, that part kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, I don't know how you do the movie to where he doesn't go, I guess, but it just seems jarring to me. I agree with you. I think they bond because they're the only two people in their lives that understand each other, and they need some sort of companionship in that way. But I mean, you can bond because you're the only two people who understand something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. And I feel like to earn it, to make it like a romance, so we understand that that's coming, the movie would have to be like another hour long or more, because there's just no build up to it. It's just constant them trying to find the aliens and overcome these obstacles. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to kiss you before I run down to the Air Force Base. It just kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't feel like I'm super crazy then, because yeah, like it really feels like what it should have been was they have a like deep hug, like, you know, something that two close friends would have when parting ways kind of thing, and then do that. But instead
Yeah, I hope
it's
you get your kid back, goodbye.
yes, exactly. Like I don't know. I don't know. But and you did mention too the his going with the aliens so easily. And I know that was something else we had kind of touched on before we hit record. And I think you had said that Spielberg has since said that that's kind of something not necessarily that he regrets about the film, but maybe that he would have done differently now that like after he had a family. And I do agree with you. Like it's kind of, on the one hand, it's the only way to end the movie the way it's been set up. Like he has been so dogged and determined in trying to find answers that of course they pick him and he is going to go onto that spaceship because there are more answers on that ship. But at the same time, well, like you said, he's leaving behind kids that he obviously cares about, and a wife that he seems to also care about and doesn't want to throw his marriage away. Like he does want it to continue, or at least that's the impression I got. So yeah, it's kind of a contradiction there of how easily he does get board the ship versus staying. But I don't feel like there's any way that movie could have ended satisfyingly without him actually boarding the ship either, just based on the way his character had been done, like it's a hard quandary, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess the only way to handle it would be to have him be more upset about leaving his family. Because I mean, it almost is like he's acting like he doesn't even, and I think you were kind of saying this too, and I don't want to just repeat you, but it's almost like he just starts acting like he has no family after going through all that trying to get them back. And it's almost like whiplash to me. So I feel like if there was some bridge, like he's just this amazing thing that aliens are offering him is so important to him, but he still has these regrets or something. I don't know. Maybe he's thinking he'll get to come back at some point. Like, I don't, but it's not handled at all. And he's like a kid at a candy store to be able to go with these aliens. I mean, that's what he wants. And I just, I don't know. I love the movie and I understand it has to end that way, but I wish that there was a little bit more connective tissue maybe to make this character that we care about seem a little bit more human at that point.
I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, there's definitely kind of a sense in just the way Richard Dreyfuss portrays it that there's this kind of relief, almost like I'm not crazy and I do have some answers here and I'm going to get more. But like you said, there really did need to be some more reluctance or something kind of on his part besides just, oh cool, I get to go on the ship. And it's not quite how he does it, but you know.
Well, Matt, I think we've kind of gotten to the end of our discussion here. I think basically our final verdict is that this is a really cool film. There's just a couple things that we kind of wish we had a little bit more preparation for or development for. But I think this has been a really fun installment in this series of alien movies that we found ourselves in this particular season. Listeners, we are actually recording this before the end of 2021, but when it comes out, it'll be January 4th. So we wish you a happy 2022 as best it can be. We got a new year. I guess there's new opportunities and new possibilities. We hope you are doing okay. As I'm sure you've noticed, Lisa wasn't with us today. She is fine and will return in our next episode. So if you want to communicate with us, if you want to tell us what you think about Close Encounters of the Third Kind or any of these movies that we've been talking about so far, or, if you are a patron and you've listened to our Patreon episode where we talked about some of the things we were watching and reading at the end of this year, and you want to communicate with us about that, we are at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page where you can contact us. We have an email, nofearcast@gmail.com, and we love hearing from folks about their takes on episodes or any recommendations for episodes or themes. If you love what we are doing, there are a few ways that you can support us. One is that you can support us on Patreon. If you do that, our $5 a month Patreon supporters get access to exclusive content. So in between our main episodes, we do shorter mini episodes that kind of play off of or expand on something that we had discussed in our main episode. Sometimes we give kind of sneak peeks into new themes, or like I mentioned earlier, talk about what we're reading or watching at the time. But you don't have to support us on Patreon to help us out if you love what we're doing. You can rate and review us on your podcatcher of choice, but especially Apple Podcasts. That is something that is entirely free. And not only do we love seeing your ratings and reviews, and thank you so much to people who have done that, but when you do that and we get more ratings and reviews, it helps other listeners who are interested in this topic find us. Theme music for the episode is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.